The lecture hall of the Velorium Institute stretched upward like a cathedral of knowledge, its crystalline walls humming with the soft blue glow of 1,000 holographic displays. And within this sacred space of learning, over 300 beings from across the known galaxy had gathered to hear the words of the most celebrated xenobiologist of his generation. Scholar Thelixus stood at the center of the stage, his elongated form swaying gently as he moved, for his species, the Etherians, had evolved on a low-gravity moon where the very concept of weight was almost foreign to their delicate bones and translucent skin that shimmered like morning frost. Today we examine a world that exists at the very edge of possibility, Thelixus announced, his voice carrying through the chamber with the help of translation devices that rendered his melodic tones into hundreds of different languages simultaneously. A world so hostile, so utterly incompatible with life as we understand it, that the Galactic Concord has classified it as a Category 7 death world, the highest rating in our system. He gestured with one of his 4 slender arms, and the holographic display behind him flickered to life, revealing a blue and green sphere spinning slowly in the darkness of space. The audience leaned forward with curiosity, their various forms shifting and rustling as they studied the image before them. "This is Earth," Thelixus continued, "located in what the locals apparently called the Sol system, a single-star arrangement at the far edge of the Orion Arm, and I must warn you that what I am about to reveal may disturb those of sensitive constitution." A Velaxian diplomat in the front row wrapped her membrane-thin wings more tightly around herself, while beside her, a Grothian merchant adjusted the pressure in his environmental suit with obvious nervousness. "Let us begin with the most immediately lethal characteristic," the scholar said, manipulating the display to show a series of measurements and graphs. "The gravitational pull of this world registers at 9.8 meters per second squared." Gasps erupted throughout the chamber, and several beings made sounds of disbelief in their native tongues. A young student near the middle of the hall raised a trembling appendage and asked, "Scholar, surely that must be an error in the data. Such gravity would be nearly 10 times what we experience here on the capital world." "There is no error," Thelixus replied with grim satisfaction, for he had anticipated this reaction and prepared extensively for this moment. "The measurements have been confirmed by 17 different survey probes, all of which were destroyed within hours of entering the planet's atmosphere. And I should note that atmospheric destruction brings us to our second point of concern." The display shifted again, showing a breakdown of Earth's atmospheric composition. "The air of this death world contains a gas called oxygen at a concentration of 21%, the scholar explained. "For those unfamiliar with oxygen, allow me to clarify. It is a highly reactive oxidizing agent that corrodes metal, causes cellular damage, and in sufficient quantities can trigger spontaneous combustion." The Grothian merchant made a sound of pure horror, and even Thelixus himself seemed to shudder at the thought. "The creatures of this world, and there are creatures, as our probes discovered before their unfortunate destruction, actually breathe this poison," he continued. "They have somehow adapted to inhale a corrosive gas with every breath they take, a gas that on most civilized worlds would be classified as an industrial hazard requiring extensive safety protocols." In the back of the lecture hall, shrouded in shadow beneath the uppermost tier of seating, a figure in a heavy environmental suit sat perfectly still, and though no one in the audience paid any attention to this mysterious presence, their stillness carried a weight that seemed to press against the very air around them. "But gravity and atmosphere are merely the beginning," Thelixus said, warming to his subject as the audience's fear grew more palpable. "The surface of Earth experiences temperature fluctuations that range from -89 degrees to +57 degrees, often within the same planetary rotation cycle." He paused to let this information sink in, watching as his students and colleagues processed the impossible numbers. The planet possesses a molten core of iron that generates unpredictable magnetic storms, he added. It is bombarded by radiation from its star, experiences regular electrical discharges from its cloud formations. They call this phenomenon lightning. And perhaps most terrifying of all, nearly 70% of its surface is covered in a substance called water, which is not only corrosive to many known materials, but is also home to predatory creatures of enormous size and ferocity. A Etherian student in the third row fainted, their delicate form crumpling like paper as their companions rushed to catch them. Thelixus nodded with understanding, for he too had nearly lost consciousness when he first reviewed the survey data years ago. I see that some of you are beginning to grasp the full scope of Earth's hostility, he observed, but I have not yet mentioned the biological factors, the microscopic organisms called bacteria and viruses that infest every surface, the venomous creatures that inject poison through specialized appendages, the apex predators that hunt through a combination of speed, strength, and cunning. The holographic display cycled through images captured by the doomed survey probes, massive creatures with rows of teeth swimming through dark water, four-legged beasts with claws and fangs prowling through dense vegetation, swarms of flying organisms that moved in clouds so thick they blocked out light. Given all of these factors, Thelixus concluded, his voice taking on the tone of absolute certainty that had made him famous throughout the academic world. It is the position of this institution, supported by the full weight of the galactic conquered scientific community, that no complex life could possibly evolve under such conditions. He spread all four of his arms wide in a gesture of finality. The gravity alone would collapse any respiratory system, shatter skeletal structures, and prevent the neurological development necessary for sentient thought, he declared. Earth is, by every metric we possess, a world where intelligent life cannot and does not exist, a monument to the universe's capacity for creating environments of pure and perfect hostility. The audience applauded, their various appendages creating a symphony of appreciation for the scholar's thorough presentation. But in the shadows at the back of the hall, the figure in the environmental suit shifted slightly, and beneath their helmet, a smile began to form on lips that had grown up under that crushing gravity, that had breathed that corrosive air, that had walked beneath those lightning storms and swum in those predator-filled waters. Commander Elena Vasquez had been found drifting in a damaged vessel at the edge of conquered space 3 weeks ago, and since then she had been studied, scanned, and questioned by dozens of different specialists who could not determine her species of origin. Today she had been brought here as a specimen, an anomaly to be analyzed by the great scholar Thelixus himself. And as she listened to him describe her home as a place where life could not possibly exist, she felt something stir within her chest, not anger, not offense, but something closer to amusement mixed with a strange and unexpected pride. These fragile creatures with their hollow bones and their terror of gravity had never known what it meant to struggle, to fight, to earn every breath against a world that seemed determined to kill you. They had never felt the burn of muscles pushed to their limits, never known the satisfaction of climbing a mountain or running until your heart felt like it might explode, never experienced the sheer stubborn joy of surviving another day on a planet that threw everything it had at you. Elena remained still and silent as the applause faded, and Thelixus prepared for the next portion of his presentation, but she knew that her time in the shadows was coming to an end. Soon they would call her forward, and soon the scholar would learn that his certainty, like so many certainties before it, was built on a foundation that could not withstand the weight of truth. The weight that she carried with every step, the weight of a world they called impossible, the weight of being human. 3 weeks earlier, Commander Elena Vasquez had opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by creatures that looked like they might shatter if she breathed too hard on them. The cryosleep pod had malfunctioned somewhere during the journey. She knew that much from the warning lights that had been flashing when the alien vessel cut through her ship's hull and pulled her frozen body from the wreckage. And according to the trembling scientists who eventually managed to communicate with her through a hastily programmed translation device, she had been drifting in the void for approximately 200 standard years. 2 centuries, she thought, letting the number roll around in her mind like a stone in an empty jar. 2 centuries since she had kissed her mother goodbye and stepped onto the launch platform at Cape Canaveral, since she had waved at the cameras and promised the children of Earth that she would find new worlds for them among the stars, since she had closed her eyes in the cryopod and dreamed of distant suns. Now those children were long dead, and their children and their children's children, and Alina Vasquez was alone in a universe that had moved on without her. The Galactic conquered. That was what her captors called themselves, though they insisted they were not captors, but rather hosts engaged in a process of diplomatic of over 400 different species spread across thousands of worlds, and in all that vast civilization spanning millions of light years, not a single one of them had ever encountered a human being. "You are a mystery," the lead scientist had told her through the translation device during their first proper conversation, his large dark eyes blinking in what she had learned to recognize as an expression of nervous curiosity. "Your physiology does not match any known species in our databases, and the vessel we recovered you from uses technology we have never seen before." Alina had tried to explain. She came from Earth, from the Sol system, from a small blue world that had sent its first explorers into the darkness barely a century before her own departure. But every time she mentioned her homeworld, the scientists would exchange glances of confusion and concern. "Earth," one of them had repeated, consulting a holographic star chart that floated between them like a three-dimensional puzzle. "We have no record of any inhabited world by that name, though there is a planet matching your description in the quarantine zone." "Quarantine zone?" Alina had asked, and that was when she first learned what the galaxy thought of her home. The Galactic conquered had discovered Earth approximately 3,000 years ago, according to their records, during a routine survey of unexplored systems at the edge of their territory, and the probe they sent to investigate had transmitted data for exactly 4 hours before falling silent. A second probe was dispatched and lasted slightly longer, 6 hours, before it too was destroyed by what the official report described as catastrophic environmental failure. Over the following centuries, the Conquered had sent 17 more probes to Earth, each one more heavily shielded and reinforced than the last, and every single one had been destroyed by the planet's hostile conditions. The gravity crushed their delicate instruments, the oxygen corroded their circuits, the electrical storms fried their sensors, the temperature fluctuations warped their casings, and in one memorable case, a probe had been physically attacked and torn apart by what the footage showed to be a large aquatic creature with rows of teeth like white knives. After that final attempt, the Conquered had officially classified Earth as a Category 7 death world, uninhabitable, hostile to all known forms of life, and absolutely not worth the cost of further investigation, and placed the entire system under permanent quarantine. No one was allowed to go there, and nothing from there could possibly survive. And yet here was Alina, sitting in a medical bay on a Conquered space station, breathing their recycled air and drinking their purified water, and generally refusing to die despite everything they knew about where she came from. "Your bone density is extraordinary," one doctor had told her, his voice filled with something between admiration and horror. "The scan shows a skeletal structure that is nearly 3 times as dense as any species in our records, with a muscular system to match. You are built like a creature designed for combat." "I'm built like a human," Alina had replied with a shrug that made the doctor flinch backward. "We all look like this back home." The medical examinations had continued for days, and with each new test, the scientists grew more disturbed by what they found. Her cardiovascular system was capable of sustained performance that their models said should cause immediate cardiac failure. Her immune system contained antibodies designed to fight thousands of different microorganisms. Her skin was thick enough to resist minor lacerations and temperature extremes, and her pain tolerance, tested accidentally when a nervous technician dropped a heavy scanner on her foot, was so high that she barely reacted to what should have been a debilitating injury. "You are a predator," the lead scientist had finally concluded after reviewing all the data. "Every aspect of your biology is optimized for survival in hostile conditions. Your forward-facing eyes, your grip strength, your endurance capacity, your ability to process and respond to threats. You are designed by evolution to hunt and kill." Alina had wanted to argue with this assessment, had wanted to explain that humans were more than just survivors and hunters, that they were artists and dreamers and lovers and builders of civilizations. But she could see the fear in the scientist's eyes, and she knew that no words would change what the data told him. She was something new to these people, something they had never encountered in all their thousands of years of exploring the galaxy, and new things were frightening. So she had submitted to their tests and answered their questions, and allowed them to keep her in the medical bay while they decided what to do with her. And all the while she had watched and listened, and learned everything she could about this strange new universe she had woken up in. The Galactic Concord was old, far older than human civilization, and it had grown comfortable in its age, spreading slowly across the stars with all the urgency of a glacier creeping down a mountainside. The species that comprised it had evolved on gentle worlds with low gravity and mild climates, worlds where the greatest predators were no larger than a house cat, and the most extreme weather was a light breeze, and they had never needed to develop the traits that made humans what they were. They had never learned to run from predators or fight for territory or endure seasons of cold and hunger, and as a result, they had never developed the resilience that came from surviving such challenges. They were brilliant. Their technology was centuries beyond anything Alina had seen on Earth, but they were also fragile in ways that she was only beginning to understand. And now, sitting in the back of Scholar Thelixus's lecture hall, listening to him describe her home as a place where intelligent life could not exist, Alina felt the full weight of that fragility pressing against her like a physical force. These creatures had conquered the stars, had built an empire that spanned the galaxy, had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel and instant communication and medical technology that could extend life for hundreds of years, and yet the mere idea of a world like Earth filled them with terror. They could not imagine living under that gravity, breathing that air, walking among those predators, and so they had concluded that no one could. But Alina knew the truth, and soon the rest of them would know it too. The scholar was finishing his presentation, his confidence radiating from every word as he declared once more that Earth was a monument to hostile impossibility, and Alina could feel the moment approaching when everything would change. They had brought her here to be studied, to be analyzed, to be explained away as some kind of anomaly or genetic experiment or lost colony from a gentler world. But she was none of those things. She was human, born and raised on the death world they feared so much, and she had come to show them what that really meant. The applause faded into expectant silence as Scholar Thelixus turned his attention to the final segment of his presentation, and his large dark eyes swept across the audience with the satisfaction of a teacher who knows his lesson has been well received. "Now," he announced, gesturing toward the shadowed upper tier where Alina sat motionless in her environmental suit, "we come to the most intriguing part of today's lecture, a practical demonstration of xenobiological analysis." Every head in the chamber turned to look at her. Hundreds of eyes and optical sensors and other sensory organs focusing on the mysterious figure who had been brought here under such strange circumstances. 3 weeks ago, a patrol vessel discovered a damaged craft drifting at the edge of conquered space. Thelixus explained. Inside that craft, they found a single occupant in a state of suspended animation, an occupant whose species does not appear in any of our databases. He beckoned with one slender arm, and Alina knew that her moment had arrived. "Please," the scholar said with what he probably thought was a welcoming smile, "come forward so that we might examine you more closely and perhaps solve the mystery of your origins." Alina rose from her seat, and the simple act of standing sent a ripple of unease through the nearest observers. There was something different about the way she moved, something that their instincts recognized even if their conscious minds could not name it, a heaviness, a deliberateness, a sense of controlled power that made their hollow bones ache with phantom sympathy. She descended the stairs slowly, each footstep landing with a soft but unmistakable thud that echoed through the crystalline chamber. And as she passed row after row of seated aliens, she could see them shrinking away from her with expressions of primal fear. They don't even know why they're afraid, she thought, and the realization filled her with a strange mixture of sadness and dark amusement. The walk from the upper tier to the stage took nearly 2 minutes, and by the time Alina reached the bottom of the stairs, the entire lecture hall had fallen into a silence so complete that she could hear the soft whirring of environmental systems in the walls. Scholar Thelixis stood waiting for her, his 4 arms clasped in front of him in what she had learned was a gesture of formal greeting, and up close she could see just how fragile he truly was, his bones visible through translucent skin, his limbs no thicker than her fingers, his entire body probably weighing less than a human child. "Thank you for joining us," he said, and though his voice was steady, she could detect a slight tremor beneath the words. "I understand that communication has been established through translation technology. Can you confirm that you understand me?" "I understand you perfectly," Alina replied, and several members of the audience flinched at the sound of her voice, for even filtered through the helmet of her environmental suit, there was a resonance to it that their ears were not designed to process. Thelixis nodded and gestured to a holographic interface that floated beside him. "We have been unable to identify your species or your world of origin," he said. "Would you be willing to input the coordinates of your homeworld so that we might cross-reference them with our star charts?" Alina stepped forward, and the stage trembled beneath her weight. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Thelixis stumbled backward as if she had shoved him, his thin legs struggling to maintain balance against a vibration they were never meant to withstand. "I apologize," Alina said, remaining still until the scholar had steadied himself. "I forget sometimes how heavy I am compared to your people." "Heavy?" Thelixis repeated, and she could see his mind working behind those large dark eyes, processing the implications of that simple word. "Yes. Well, please proceed with entering your coordinates." Alina reached out and touched the holographic interface, her gloved fingers moving with practiced precision as she input the numbers that she had memorized decades ago, or rather, centuries ago from her perspective, when she had first plotted the course for humanity's inaugural journey to the stars. The display flickered, processed the data, and then projected an image that made the entire audience gasp in unified horror. Earth hung in the air before them, blue and green and white, spinning slowly in the darkness like a jewel of impossible beauty. "No," Thelixis whispered, his voice barely audible. "That cannot be correct. Those are the coordinates for the quarantine death world." "That is correct," Alina said, and she reached up with both hands to grip the seals of her helmet. "That death world is my home." She twisted the helmet free and lifted it from her head, and the lecture hall erupted into chaos. Beings screamed and fled toward the exits, their fragile bodies crashing into each other in their desperation to escape, while others simply froze in place, their minds unable to process what their eyes were showing them. For Alina Vasquez was not wearing a suit to protect herself from their environment. She was wearing a suit to protect them from her. Her face was angular and strong, with forward-facing eyes that locked onto Thelixis with the focused intensity of a predator, and her dark hair fell around her shoulders in waves that seemed to absorb the light. And when she smiled, her teeth were white and even and just slightly pointed in a way that spoke of an evolutionary history filled with meat and bone and the hunt. "You said no complex life could evolve on Earth," Alina said, taking a step toward the scholar, and the stage shook again beneath her weight. "You said the gravity would crush any respiratory system and shatter any skeletal structure." Thelixis tried to retreat, but his legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Please," he gasped, raising his forearms in a gesture of surrender, "please do not hurt me." Alina stopped moving and looked down at the trembling creature before her, and something in her expression softened. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said gently, crouching down to bring herself closer to his level. And even crouching, she was massive compared to his prone form. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone." She reached out one hand, slowly and carefully, and helped Thelixis back to his feet. "We're not crushed by our gravity," she continued, speaking loudly enough for the remaining audience members to hear. "We run beneath it. We run for fun, for sport, for the sheer joy of feeling our muscles work and our hearts pound and our lungs burn with effort." She gestured to her body, to the dense muscles visible beneath her suit's underlayer. "We climb mountains that reach into the sky," she said. "We swim in oceans filled with creatures that could swallow us whole. We dive beneath the waves and hold our breath for minutes at a time, exploring worlds within our world." Her voice grew stronger, filling the chamber with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in the very walls. "We fight, we have always fought, against predators and against each other and against the world itself. But we also love, and we dream, and we create things of beauty that would make you weep if you could see them." She looked around at the terrified faces, staring at her from the remaining seats. "We carry our children on our shoulders," she said, and her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "We dance at weddings and cry at funerals and stay awake through the night to watch for danger so that others can sleep." She turned back to Thelixis, who was still trembling but no longer trying to flee. "Your death world didn't kill us," Alina Vasquez said, and in her eyes there burned a fire that had been kindled in ice ages and tempered in 10,000 generations of struggle and survival. "It forged us." The scholar stared at her in silence, and for the first time in his long and distinguished career, he had absolutely nothing to say. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord Council was convened within hours of the incident at the Velorium Institute, and for the first time in living memory, every single seat in the great circular chamber was filled with representatives who had dropped everything to attend. Alina Vasquez stood in the center of the room, surrounded by a ring of holographic displays that showed her vital signs, her body temperature, her heart rate, and a dozen other measurements that the council had deemed necessary for their protection. Armed guards stood at every entrance, though what their weapons could do against her, no one seemed willing to discuss openly, and the air hummed with tension so thick that Alina could almost taste it. "Let us begin," announced High Chancellor Vexoral, an ancient being whose species had been among the founders of the Concord over 10,000 years ago. "We are here to address what may be the most significant discovery in the history of our civilization, the existence of intelligent life on a Category 7 death world." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, and Alina could see fear in almost every face turned toward her. "Commander Vasquez," the High Chancellor continued, his voice steady despite the obvious strain in his posture, "you claim to have been born and raised on the planet designated in our records as Earth. Is this correct?" "It is correct," Alina replied, keeping her voice calm and even. "I was born in a city called Houston, in a region called Texas, on the continent of North America. I grew up there, I went to school there, I trained as a pilot there, and I left there 200 years ago on a mission to explore the stars." "And you expect us to believe," interrupted a counselor from the far side of the chamber, his voice sharp with accusation. That your species evolved naturally on a world with nearly 10 times our standard gravity. I don't expect you to believe anything, Alina said, turning to face her accuser. I'm simply telling you the truth. What you do with that truth is up to you. The questioning continued for hours, with counselors from dozens of different species asking her about every aspect of human biology, human history, human society, and human technology. She told them about the ice ages, when her ancestors had survived temperatures cold enough to freeze water solid for months at a time, wrapping themselves in animal skins and huddling around fires they had learned to create with their own hands. She told them about the predators, the wolves and bears and lions and sharks, that had hunted humans for millennia before humans learned to hunt them back, developing weapons and tactics, and eventually driving many of those predators to the edge of extinction. She told them about the diseases, the microscopic enemies that had killed more humans than any predator ever could, and about how her species had learned to fight back with medicine and vaccines, and eventually conquered plagues that had once wiped out entire civilizations. She told them about the wars, the terrible conflicts that had torn humanity apart again and again throughout their history, and about how they had eventually learned, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, to resolve their differences through words instead of weapons. And she told them about the dreams, the insatiable curiosity that had driven humans to explore every corner of their deadly world, and then look up at the stars and wonder what else was out there waiting to be discovered. When she finished speaking, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the arguments began. This species is too dangerous to be allowed into our civilization, declared Counselor Threxus, a military commander whose species had not fought a war in over 3,000 years. Everything we have heard today confirms that humans are predators, apex predators evolved on a world that would kill any of us within minutes, and we cannot risk exposing our people to such a threat. On the contrary, responded Elder Malixus, a philosopher whose wisdom was respected across the conquered. What we have heard today is a story of survival against impossible odds, of a species that refused to surrender to a hostile universe and instead rose to meet every challenge it faced. Refused to surrender, Threxus scoffed. They slaughtered each other in wars that killed millions. They drove other species to extinction. They poisoned their own world with industrial waste. These are not the actions of a civilized people. These are the actions of a young people, Elder Malixus countered. A people still learning, still growing, still finding their way through the darkness. And I would remind the counselor that our own ancestors made similar mistakes in the early days of our civilizations. Our ancestors never faced the challenges that humans face. Another counselor interjected. We cannot compare ourselves to creatures forged in such a crucible. We have no frame of reference for understanding them. Alina listened to the debate with growing frustration, watching these fragile beings argue about her species, as if humans were a natural disaster to be contained, rather than people to be understood. "May I speak?" she asked, and the chamber fell silent once more. High Chancellor Vexorel nodded his permission, and Alina took a deep breath before addressing the assembly. "I've been listening to you talk about my people like we're monsters," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "and I understand why. Everything about us must seem terrifying to you, from our bodies to our history to the world that created us." She paused, looking around at the assembled faces. "But I want you to understand something," she continued. "We didn't choose to be born on a death world. We didn't choose to evolve under crushing gravity, breathing poisonous air, surrounded by predators and diseases and natural disasters that could kill us at any moment." Her voice grew softer, more thoughtful. "That world shaped us, yes. It made us strong and resilient and stubborn in ways that you can't imagine. But it also taught us something that I don't think you've ever had to learn." She met the High Chancellor's eyes directly. "It taught us that nothing is guaranteed," she said. "That survival has to be earned every single day, that comfort and safety are precious gifts that can be taken away in an instant, and that the only way to face a hostile universe is together, watching out for each other, protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She gestured around the chamber at the assembled counselors. "You look at me and see a predator," she said. "But what I see when I look in the mirror is a protector, someone who was built to survive so that she could help others survive, someone who carries the weight of gravity in her bones so that she can bear the burdens that others cannot carry." She smiled, and for the first time, several counselors seemed to see something other than threat in her expression. "Humans aren't coming to your galaxy to conquer," she said. "We've had enough of conquest. We know where that road leads, and we've chosen a different path." She spread her hands in a gesture of openness. "We're coming because we want to learn," she said. "We want to meet new people and see new worlds and understand how life can exist in forms we never imagined. We want to share what we've learned and discover what you can teach us." Her voice grew firm with conviction. "And yes, we're coming whether you like it or not. Because that's what humans do. We push forward, we explore. We refuse to accept limits that others try to place on us." She locked eyes with Counselor Threxus, who had been most vocal in arguing against her. "But we're not your enemies," she said. "We could have been, if history had gone differently. But we've learned too much and come too far to go back to being the creatures you're afraid of." She stood tall, letting them see the full height and breadth of her earth-forged body. "We're going to be your neighbors," she concluded, "and I think that once you get to know us, you'll find that having friends who were built to survive on a death world is actually a pretty good thing." The chamber erupted into debate once more, but Alina could see that something had shifted in the way they looked at her. They were still afraid. That would take time to change. But now there was something else in their eyes as well. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe even hope. The vote came 3 days later, after endless hours of debate that had stretched through nights and into mornings, after delegations from across the conquered had demanded their chance to speak, after scientists and philosophers and military commanders had all offered their perspectives on what the discovery of humanity meant for their civilization. Alina had spent those 3 days in a comfortable suite of rooms overlooking the capital city, watching through the window as beings from hundreds of different worlds went about their daily lives below her, shopping in floating markets, traveling in graceful vehicles that seemed to glide on invisible currents, raising children who would never know what it felt like to fear the sky above them. She had been given access to the Conquered's information networks, and she had used that access to learn everything she could about this strange and beautiful civilization that had conquered the stars while remaining so fundamentally fragile. They had no military to speak of. Conflicts were resolved through arbitration and negotiation, and the very concept of armed warfare had become almost theoretical to most species. They had no survival instincts in the way that humans understood them. Food was abundant. Predators were non-existent, and the idea of fighting for resources was as foreign to them as the crushing gravity of Earth. And yet they had built wonders that took Alina's breath away, cities that floated among the clouds, ships that could cross the galaxy in weeks, medical technology that could heal wounds and cure diseases and extend life for centuries. Art and music and literature that spoke to emotions she hadn't known existed. These people are not weak, she had realized as she studied them. They're just different. They grew in a garden while we grew in a wilderness, and neither path is better or worse, just different. Now she stood before the assembled council once more, waiting to hear the decision that would shape the future of 2 civilizations. "The vote has been tallied," High Chancellor Vexorel announced, his voice carrying the weight of history. "By a margin of 63% to 37%, the Galactic Conquered has voted against permanent quarantine of the Sol system." Relief flooded through Alina's body, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Instead, the High Chancellor continued, we have approved a proposal for a cautious exchange program, limited diplomatic contact between the conquered and the human species, to be expanded gradually as mutual understanding develops. He turned to face Alina directly. Commander Vasquez, the Council has designated you as humanity's first official ambassador to the Galactic Conquered. Do you accept this responsibility? I accept, Alina said, bowing her head in the gesture of respect she had learned from the cultural database, and I promise to do everything in my power to build bridges between our peoples. After the session ended, Elder Malixus approached her in the corridor outside the chamber, his ancient body moving slowly but with a dignity that demanded respect. You handled yourself well in there, he said, his voice warm despite the weakness of age. I have lived for nearly 800 years, and I have never seen the Council so divided or so ultimately united in their decision. It was closer than I would have liked, Alina admitted. 37% wanted to lock us away forever. Fear is a powerful force, Malixus acknowledged, and you represent everything they have spent millennia learning to avoid: danger, struggle, conflict, uncertainty. But you also represent something they have been missing without knowing it. What's that? Alina asked. The elder smiled, an expression that looked strange on his alien features but somehow conveyed warmth all the same. Possibility, he said. We have become comfortable in our civilization, settled in our ways, content to maintain what we have built rather than reaching for what we might become. But your people have never known that kind of comfort, and so you have never stopped reaching. He placed one thin hand on her arm, the touch so light she barely felt it. I voted for the exchange program not because I am unafraid of humans, he said. I am terrified of your species, terrified in ways I cannot fully articulate. But I also believe that fear is sometimes a sign that growth is needed. He met her eyes with a gaze that held centuries of wisdom. The conquered has been stagnant for thousands of years, he said. Perhaps it is time for us to learn how to be uncomfortable again. Alina covered his hand with her own, careful not to apply any pressure that might injure his fragile bones. We'll be gentle, she promised, as gentle as we can be. Malixus laughed, a soft sound like wind chimes in a breeze. I suspect that even your gentleness will shake us to our foundations, he said, but that may be exactly what we need. 6 months later, the first human diplomatic vessel emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of conquered space. Alina stood on the observation deck of the capital station, watching through the viewport as the ship approached, a vessel built by hands that had evolved to grip and climb and fight, powered by engines designed by minds that had learned to master fire and lightning and the atom itself, crewed by men and women who had been born under crushing gravity, and raised to breathe corrosive air and grown strong in ways that no other species in the galaxy could match. Scholar Thelixus stood beside her, his posture still nervous but no longer terrified, and together they watched as the ship docked with the station and the airlock doors began to cycle open. I have studied your species extensively since our first meeting, Thelixus said, his voice thoughtful. I have read your literature and watched your films and listened to your music, trying to understand how creatures from such a hostile world could create such beauty. Did you find an answer? Alina asked. I found many answers, the scholar replied, but the one that resonates most strongly is this. You create beauty because you have known ugliness. You sing songs of joy because you have experienced sorrow. You tell stories of hope because you have faced despair. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something that had not been there before, not fear but respect. Your world did not just forge your bodies, he said. It forged your souls, and souls that have been tested by fire burn brighter than those that have only known comfort. The airlock opened, and the first members of the human delegation stepped onto the station. They moved differently from everyone else on the station. Heavier, more deliberate, each footstep carrying the memory of a world that had tried its best to kill them. And the assembled aliens watched them with a mixture of awe and trepidation that Alina had come to recognize as the natural response to encountering her species. But there was something else in the watching crowd now, something that hadn't been there when Alina first arrived alone and frightened, and unsure of her place in this strange new universe. There was excitement. There was anticipation. There was the recognition that something new was beginning, something that would change everything, something that could not be predicted or controlled or fully understood. The humans did not float through the corridor like the other species. They strode, their feet striking the floor with confident rhythm, their eyes scanning their surroundings with the alert awareness of creatures who had evolved to watch for danger. They were heavy and they were strong and they were utterly, magnificently alive. Alina stepped forward to greet them, and as she shook hands with the delegation leader, a firm grip, a predator's grip, the grip of a species that had earned its place among the stars, she felt a surge of pride that brought tears to her eyes. They had come so far, her people, from caves to campfires to cities to starships, fighting every step of the way against a universe that seemed determined to destroy them. And now here they were, standing among the stars, ready to show the galaxy what it really meant to be human. Scholar Thelixis had been wrong about so many things, but he had been right about one thing at least. No life could endure Earth's gravity, no life except the life that had learned to call that crushing weight home. The humans had not just endured. They had thrived. And they were only getting started.